guys! So today's video is for those of you who really want to make changes in your life, but you just feel like you don't have the time or the energy to do so. So we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about that. So I want to start by sort of painting a picture of what this looks like. How does it feel for us? How does it present in our body? How does it present in our life? You know? And a lot of the feelings that come along with this is, maybe this overwhelming sense of fatigue or tiredness. Maybe we're feeling really irritable. Maybe we're just lacking the spark when we wake up. The Mondays, the Monday blues, as some people might call them. Maybe there's this lack of direction, the sense of like, I'm not really sure what to do in my life. I just feel really tired all the time and not really sure how to relieve this, how to move past this. Maybe you find yourself wanting coffee all the time. The I need a coffee kick, in the afternoon. And perhaps your fatigue doesn't necessarily equal the level of action or activities that you're doing in your day. Or maybe it does, maybe you're really busy running around all day. But the overarching thing here is that life feels draining and possibly very complex and busy. And we almost feel like we're just running in place, right? We're go, 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 do, or just like feel like sluggish. And things just aren't really moving forward or transforming in our life. My background is an oncology nurse, and in the nursing world, they talk about this all the time, right? Like the nursing profession is just a natural caregiving profession. And so the word burnout, that would be sort of the overarching word to describe maybe this feeling or sensation or experience within us. We just feel like our battery's been drained and depleted, and we're not really 100% sure why, or we're not really sure how to not feel like that anymore. I often find that this sort of sensation or experience of burnout, it really falls a lot on people who have maybe neglected themselves and put other people first a lot of times. I think that's why they maybe talk about it in like caring professions, because that's really the whole job entails that, right? Your every day is like taking care of people, and then you go home, and if you have families or whatever, then you're taking care of people there. And we can take a back burner, like we can sort of be putting ourselves in the back seat and not really tending to our well-being. But the fact of the matter is that it's really important to sort of tune into our body and really bring awareness to our experience. Because if we haven't had this good relationship with ourselves, right, this sort of putting ourselves first, then we need to sort of start to cultivate that, right? Our body is important because it connects us energetically, right? It's the sort of connection for us to connect with our higher self and our experience here in this life. So we want to begin to come into right relationship with it so that we can feel more connected and more a participant in our life, right? And not just somebody getting through the day. When we're thinking about our health and well-being from a holistic standpoint, we really have to look at our energy, right? Like it's not just our physical health. Like our body is affected by how it's affected by the quality and the flow of our energetic body as well, right? The things that we can't necessarily see, touch, or feel in the regular sense of like five senses, but we do feel the effects of it when we start feeling that fatigue or irritability or boredom or just lack of joy in our life, right? That's a sign that something in our energy is not flowing properly. So, our life force, our vitality, our chi energy, right? So when we get this feeling that our battery is drained, there's a leak somewhere, right? Where's the leak coming from? How do we plug it up, right? So that we can begin to retain our energy and then consciously use our energy in our life in a way that is nourishing and not draining. So in shamanic terms, we call this power loss or soul loss. These are both ways that our energy can sort of be, depleting from our body. And we want to begin to bring that back, right? We want to begin to cultivate a connection and strengthen that connection and patch up the holes, patch up the leaks, right? So we're not just going around, draining our energy everywhere. And, I want to touch too on how do we get these in the first place, right? How do we begin to start having, leaky energy or blocked energy or any of those things? And, it's just really through life. They say nobody goes through life unscathed, right? And that's so true. As we're growing up, if we have even, little traumas or little things in our life that are well-meaning, but, people might not classify as super traumatic or harmful, those things can really shape how we see the world and how we interact with the world and how we navigate in the world. That might not always serve us best, right? So, there's big moments and small moments in our life that can sort of begin to shape our experience in a way that, as an adult now, that is where our healing work comes in, where we begin to be, the masters of our own energy in a way, right? So, often we get to this place where we just sort of hit this block where we've, almost like enough is enough, right? And if you're here watching this, that's probably where you're at, right? You just want change in your life. You've tried doing some things maybe, and things just aren't really switching. So what do we do now, right? So before we get to the doing, we have to back it up a little step, right? We have to see what exactly counts as energy in our life. And when I was sort of tuning into this and contemplating it, I came up with 3 different areas that I felt were important to mention. Now, this might not be like an all-inclusive list, so take that into account. But these are maybe 3 main areas that I guess I've sort of labeled them as like our energetic currency. And these are sort of areas where we might want to tune in and reflect on, because these could be areas where the leaks are coming from. So the 3 sort of energetic assets is our time, right? This is probably our most valuable form of currency, energetic currency that we could be giving away, right? We don't know how much time we have, and really every minute is precious, right? What do you want to give your time to in your life? If we're giving our time to all these things that don't light us up, or we don't enjoy, or hanging out with people that we really don't want to hang out with, that's our time that we're giving away. That's our sort of energy and vitality that's leaking out, right? And we'll talk more in detail about these in just a second. So the next one is money. That is energetic currency in like actual physical form, right? And attention. So by this one, I mean, yes, we give our attention when we're, talking to somebody, but this is also our mental energy, right? Our thinking, overthinking. So let's sort of talk about these in a little bit more detail. So time, this is the first one. And I'm going to go off my notes here. So I mentioned doing things that we don't want to do, right? That's a big one. Somebody calls you up and wants to go to dinner and a movie or something like that, and you're just not feeling like going out, but you don't want to say no because you feel bad about saying no. So you go anyway, even though you don't really want to. I mean, that's just, that's just leaking out your energy into something that you don't really have your heart into. I gave some examples here, and like I said, this is not a fully complete list, but these are the ones that came to mind. And I encourage you too, as you're listening to this, take some time to maybe do some journaling and see where you might be leaking some energy in these 3 different areas. So for the time one, I put working overtime, visiting someone, keeping a friend around, right? If we, like I mentioned, if we have somebody who we don't particularly enjoy their company, but we don't want to break the friendship because we don't want to like hurt their feelings, right? So we just keep hanging out with them, even though there might maybe not an energetic match, right? We are, how do I say this? So like the people that you hang out with, you know how like when you're younger, your mom always said like, don't hang out with people who do bad things because you're guilt by association and stuff like that. Well, energetically, like if we're hanging out with people who are always like negative and complaining and doing all these things, that's like an energy drain, right? Have you ever been, I used to go visit my grandma, my mom's mom. She's since passed away. And I remember going to visit her, and the whole time she would just sit there and complain about how she wishes she was 6 feet under and life was terrible. Her body was, getting old, and don't get old and do this and da da da, and life's terrible, And by the time I was done visiting with her, man, I was like, I need to go to bed. Like, I feel like every bit of like energy was just sucked out of my body, you know? And, you can just feel it. Certain people, you can just, if you tune in, you can just really, you can feel their sort of energetic frequency in a way, right? And so we have to really think like, is this a good match? And is this nourishing or is it depleting, right? If it's not nourishing, let it go. Maybe the friendship will come back in a different, stronger form, right? Or maybe not. Maybe it goes and then a better one replaces it. Same thing with relationships and jobs. So the next one is money. And I wrote down here, newer, bigger, better. And for me, that's that sort of like, I think it's in our modern society now, we sometimes think like, if I buy this thing, it's going to make my life easier. Or if I get the newer model, then it's going to be better. Or, we don't need to fix this. I'll just get a new one, right? Things are replaceable and we can just use our money to spend into that. But where we put our money is important though, right? And we want to be making a conscious choice of where we're spending it, right? One of the things that I used to do a lot was eating out. I justified it with, I'm busy, I'm working, and the kids got an activity, so I'm just gonna grab some food at, the restaurant or at the fast food place, and it'll be fine, right? But when the situation with my family changed, back at the end of 2025, right after I went from nursing to shamanic healer for full time, my husband got laid off from his job. So necessity sort of stepped in and was like, we're gonna shut this down right now. And so I haven't been eating out, right? Because we couldn't. But now, looking in retrospect, I really see how just the act of eating out like that, it was draining my energy because it was trying to fill some void that I was completely ignoring and avoiding and shutting out. Try to look at where you're putting your money and why you're spending it on the things you're spending. And it might be really enlightening for you. And that being said, if you find yourself making excuses, such as myself, then look at that too, right? That's probably a red flag, telltale sign that there's something underneath that really wants to be looked at. So our attention is the next one. And I think this is a really important one too, because this one can really sort of fly under the radar in a lot of ways, because our mind is always going, our mind is always thinking, and we don't pay much mind to our mind and what it's saying a lot of times. And the thoughts can tend to kind of come in and leave just, quick. So what are the ways that our mental energy can be spent? So one of the things I wrote down here was blame. We can spend a lot of time blaming other people for our problems, blaming our parents for our problems, and just sort of living in that victim state, right? We're just ruminating on how the world is doing us wrong, or all the bad things in our life, and not really taking responsibility for it ourselves. And how that begins to deplete us in a lot of ways is because we're not taking responsibility for the situation in our life, which, yes, maybe there's some contributing factors to how we got here, but like I mentioned earlier, it's always our responsibility to shift things for ourselves, right? And so our thoughts and how they kind of like when we're ruminating on things, it's almost like we're just siphoning out more of our energy, because it's like giving our power away to somebody else, right? We're saying that somebody else is responsible for our situation and we're not. I am powerless. That's essentially what you're saying, is I am powerless. And we're not, right? We're not, and we don't want to be. Another area with our attention that I wrote down was thinking about the future, planning things. This was a big one for me, and still is, that a lot of times I would sort of plan out a situation in my life of how it was going to unfold, and this is how it was going to, this goes back to when I was leaving nursing as well. Lots of lessons learned in the last 6 months or so. And my plan was that my husband was going to work at his engineering job, and he would just sustain us while I continued to build my business, and all would be well, like smooth sailing. Like in my mind I was like, this is going to be smooth sailing. I can just take it easy, take my time. And then obviously it didn't go to plan, but I spent so much time and energy laying out that whole timeline to like, that didn't even come true. And it was a time sucker. It was an energy sucker. Another area that I think about, and this is something that I have recently seen, like, oh gosh, I really do this a lot, is sort of when I go to have a conversation with somebody, like if it's either a more difficult conversation, or if it's maybe not like an everyday conversation or somebody that I see all the time, then I will sort of plan the conversation in my mind of what I'm going to say and practice it in my head, almost like if I was giving a speech and like I was trying to memorize the lines. So I practice all the different scenarios of how the conversation might unfold or go, so that I can sort of, be prepared for any scenario, right? I don't know if that's something y'all do, but this is definitely something I'm guilty of. And it's funny because I happened to notice this kind of recently, and I was like, gosh, why do I do that? Why do I waste my time doing that? Because most of the time, once again, just like the planning of the future, it doesn't, the conversation doesn't go how I imagine it in my mind, And, so something like that stems from maybe this feeling of not being safe in a situation, or wanting to feel safe, right? Wanting to feel secure in whatever comes our way, right? Fear of the unknown. And so we sort of pre-plan. We put our energy into that. But it's really not serving us in a lot of ways. So that brings us on to, why do we do this? Why do we put our energy in these ways that are draining us rather than nourishing and supporting us? When we have a sort of wound that is unhealed, then it can be triggered, and we want to feel loved, and we want to feel needed, and we want to feel important, or we want to feel like we matter to other people. And so we search that out, right? We're searching that out through external means. And so we do all these things, or we, try to fill it with stuff or food, or, mental chatter, right? We're trying to like fill the worry. If we were to sort of quiet ourselves and look within, right? Really tune into what's going on, rather than pushing through and doing a whole bunch of things, keeping busy, whatever it is, then we would start to hear what's really going on under the surface, right? As it's really human nature to not want to be feeling pain or discomfort. And ultimately, that's what's going to be sitting underneath of these, these wounds. And if we start to sort of feel that discomfort coming up, it sort of triggers us into these patterns, right? Of maybe complicating our life, keeping busy, avoiding things by just doing a bunch of things for other people, or whatever it is, right? Going out shopping, spending money, or eating out, whatever it is. And even though these might be the underlying factors for the majority, if not all of us, right? We all have our own unique story. We all have our own unique background. It's almost like we have maybe these core wounds that are alike, but our story's all different of how we got here and what triggers us. But the feelings are quite similar, right, between every human being. And it maybe manifests in just a different way for each of us as well. And that's why I really say take some time to tune in and do some journaling on this, because until we begin to do that, until we begin to bring our awareness to that, then we're going to keep sort of doing all of these subconscious actions that are really not serving us anymore. So how can we begin to sort of plug up these energetic leaks, right? How can we begin to create change in our life? This is what we ultimately want, right? Everybody, if you're watching this right now, then I'm sure that is something that you would like in your life. Now, ultimately, this is about walking a healing path, right? This is a lifelong journey for all of us, but little steps create big transformation. So today I'm going to give you just one little step that can really make a huge difference in your life. And, when I first started on my own healing path, one of the really most difficult things that I had to work through was finding the courage to be able to say no to people. I can't even tell you how hard it was for me to tell people no. You think such an easy word, 2-letter word, and I most of the time could not do it. The fear of disappointing somebody, or the fear of what they would think of me, or the fear of just standing up for myself was so overwhelming that I just didn't have the capacity to do it. And I really had to start working at that and realizing that it was one of the big sources of energy leaks in my own life. And the ability to say no, I really see it as one of those really core sort of foundational support structures that would be necessary to get in place for us to begin to sort of deepen our healing, right? To move forward in our healing. I get this sort of image of this ship, right? And if the hull of the ship has a leak in it, we're not going to go and buy new sails for the ship, or paint a new sign on it or something like that. We need to deal with the foundation, because that's the root issue to start. And then we can start maybe working on the other things on the ship that are, maybe nice to work with, but they're not that solid support. We need a good structural support first, okay? And, this is going to really begin by bringing both honesty and awareness within our life, right? Like I've said, I have had so many excuses to why I do things, right? And I was the queen of making excuses for anything throughout my life. I always had a reason why I couldn't say no, or why I couldn't do this. And really it was just me not even being open to being honest, or wanting to be aware of how I was sort of creating my own, it was almost like my own living hell in a lot of ways. Really, that's just really what I would call it, looking back on it. And it was just, the oppression felt, in a lot of ways, the oppression that I created for myself felt less scary than the fact of actually beginning to look at what I was doing and why I was doing it. So that being said, when we begin to be honest with ourselves and turn within and look at the reasons why we're doing these things, we can't help but notice it after that. And once we see something, we can't unsee it, right? So what I'm going to give here to sort of as a starting point for you to help sort of plug up some of the energetic leaks, so to speak, is 5 different questions that we can ask ourselves when we've either been asked to do something or we're anticipating to do something in our life, to sort of check in with ourselves, right? It's just a way for us to check in with our own energy to see, do I want to say yes or do I really want to say no? And, if you're like me, saying no can feel really scary. And there was a lot of times that I was aware that I wanted to say no, but I still didn't have the courage, to say it. That's okay. I completely understand where you're at. But even just the act of becoming more aware of it, we're going to be able to start to sort of strengthen that muscle, right? So don't get down on yourself if you don't start to say no right away, or there's still a bunch of times where you say yes when you wanted to say no. It's all okay. Even going through these questions after the fact can be extremely beneficial, right, for our healing path. So don't ever get down on yourself for that. And the other thing I want to mention too is, especially depending on where we're at in our healing path and our sort of connection with our own intuition, and a lot of times I really had no clue what I wanted. It was so hard for me to really get a good sense of what felt right for me and what didn't. And even today, it's still, I need time to sort of process things a lot of times. And, number one, it's okay to tell people that you need time to think about it. And the second thing is going through these questions that I'm going to give you will sort of help you to begin to process that a little bit easier, right? If we don't know, it's sort of like if we can kind of go through these, it might shed some light on what we're feeling, how we're feeling. And as we begin to practice this in our life, it's going to get easier, right? We're going to get more in tune with our intuition. Okay. So 5 questions. So question number 1 is, do you want to do it? Right? Yes or no? Now, like I mentioned before, if you're not really sure, right? Because our fear can really be a very, what's the word I'm looking for? Persuasive. So even if the answer is yes, let's go through the other ones just to kind of see, we might find some other things underneath of that yes, okay? Number 2 is, do I have the time, energy, money, or space? Now, energy can be both physical energy or emotional energy. There's a lot of people who, myself included, when my dad was alive, he could be like a little bit draining to deal with. There was a lot of tension sometimes between our relationship, and I really had to be in like a good emotional state and like sort of ready to go hang out with him sometimes. And, I always had to take that into account before I made that decision if I wanted to go hang out with him or not. Okay. And the third one, did they ask me? Now, you might be wondering why this is one of the options, and I'm going to explain to you. A lot of times when we're very much a giving person, a caring person, or an over-giving person, right? When our boundaries are really not very firm, or when we don't have clear boundaries, I should say, then a lot of times we will volunteer ourselves before we've even been asked to do anything or to help somebody. And this was my case a lot of the time. I was just finding myself offering up, whether it be taking somebody somewhere or doing something for somebody. Oh, I'll help you move. They didn't even ask me. Why am I volunteering this, right? And so we want to be aware, did they even ask for your help or not? Or did they ask for you to do something for them? Okay, it's really important. Number 4 is, does it involve me in any way, shape, or form? Right? Am I even, does this even affect me? Am I even affected by this situation or scenario or whatever it is? And the reason, well, there's other reasons why I mentioned this, but um, you know, one of the things I want to mention here is parents and kids, right? When it comes to family, or I should say family really, when it comes to family, a lot of times we have this sense of obligation that because they are in need of help, we are in required or obligated to help them. Like we almost feel this sense of responsibility, like it does involve me. Well, it's my parent or it's my child. And not saying that we don't ever want to help them or come to their aid in any way. There's times where yes, we absolutely need to do this, right? If we have a young child, they can't possibly do things for themselves, right? A baby or a toddler or anything like that. And so we do have an obligation for that, right? But let's say our parents or our adult children, or even it doesn't even have to be our older kids, right? If there was one time that my son, he had Boy Scouts and he didn't wash his, I think it was his scout shirt, and he didn't want to go to the what do you call it, the scout meeting that night because he wasn't in his Class A uniform and he felt embarrassed. And we told him, like, you have a responsibility to go. If you didn't wash your shirt after the last camp outing, then you're just going to have to make do. I mean, they're not, realistically, I knew they weren't going to A, say anything, or B, kick him out, right? It's not that kind of troop. They're very, like, low-key and, they're understanding. But he sort of had to go through that. Like, I wasn't going to be doing him any favors by saying, oh, okay, well, we're going to let you sit this one out because you don't want to wear your other Boy Scout t-shirt, right? So we had him go, and he just had to work through that feeling of, taking responsibility for not washing his clothes like he was supposed to, right? And so if we'd gone the opposite, there would have been a missed opportunity there. When you try to sort of relieve a problem for somebody, then you also take away an opportunity for learning and growth and possible healing for them too, right? We don't know what journey somebody else is on, and we can only look at it from us, like, is this the right thing for us or not? And if it's somebody else's situation, then we just have to trust that whatever they're going through is for their best and highest good, and we if it's not right for us to be mingled in that, then we just need to be okay with not being a part of it, okay? Even if it's family. Okay, so number 5. Now, I'll say, like, I put 2 questions here because sometimes, like I mentioned, we don't always know what we're feeling at times, especially if, we've stuffed things down for a lot of our life, or we haven't really tuned into our emotions or anything like that, or if we, depending on our family circumstances growing up. I know that's my case. So I put 2 questions. The first one is, what is my underlying intention, right? So, are we making dinner for our friend because we honestly want to cook a meal for them and either hang out with them or spend time with them or whatever from a genuine heart-centered place? Or are we doing it because we're either expecting something in return, or we expect even a thank you? Like, if you make something for somebody and they don't say thank you, if you're feeling like, offended by that, then maybe you need to evaluate the intention behind giving the gift, right? So the part 2 of this, because like I mentioned, if we don't really know, if we can't quite get to what our underlying intention is, this one can be helpful to sort of figure that out in a different way. Sort of like a backdoor way of seeing it. What do I fear will happen if I say no? Okay? So we can kind of think and tune into what fears are coming up, and that'll sort of get us to the answer of our intention sometimes, or whether we really want to. Now, that being said, if our fear of saying no brings something up, maybe we are fear of disappointment, or fear that they're not going to be friends with us anymore, or whatever it is, then we want to go back to the, backtrack to the first question here of, do I want to do it? Maybe we don't necessarily want to do it. Maybe we're saying yes out of fear. And so, go through all these questions, 1 through 5, and see what it looks like, and then just make a decision from there. And, if you, like I said, if saying yes or saying no still feels scary for you, and you just aren't ready in certain moments, then this is still helpful to go through. And, what it does is it sort of begins to align your energy in a new way. It's almost like you're strengthening that foundation. Even if you don't go through with saying no, it still strengthens that. Okay, so it's not a loss. So still do this. And like I said, even in retrospect, it is very helpful as well. If you enjoyed the content today, please consider a like and subscribe. I really appreciate the support. And if you want to keep in touch, I do have a monthly newsletter that you can sign up for. And if you want one-to-one support on your healing path, then I also offer healing services and free resources on my website, thespiritwithin.com. I'll put the links in the description below. So I just want to say thank you so much for being here today. And yeah, just remember that many small steps equal big transformation in our lives. So keep going, keep healing, and don't be afraid to go within. Y'all take care, and until we see each other again. Bye, guys.